Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, at the end of each legislative session, our colleague, the late John Maginnis, would quip that the legislature could have done less, but it ran out of time. Well, this year's session took on many questions and had plenty time, but still some issues, such as congressional redistricting, remain unresolved. A newly formed river channel has prompted debate about whether to close it or let it flow. And on the lakefront, a condo proposal has raised questions about whether to stop it or let it rise. At City Hall, the mayor's office and the city council are at odds over the smart city internet plan. And some elections across the country showed strong feelings about D.A.s being too soft on crime. Joining us as we discuss these stories are tonight's Informed Sources. Errol, Laborde, producer of Informed Sources. Michael Isaac Stein, reporter, The Lens. Mark Schlefstein, environmental reporter, The Times-Picayune, The New Orleans Advocate. And Tyler Bridges, political reporter, The Times-Picayune, The New Orleans Advocate. And we are going to go on over to Tyler first because the legislature wrapped up the regular session. So let's take a look at what they did. So what happened and what did not happen?
Yeah, channeling John Maginnis, the circus left town Monday night out of Baton Rouge. The biggest issue this year was the record amount of surplus money that the legislature had. This was money that had been passed by the Democratic Congress and President Biden, sending money to states. And also the legislature had more money than normal because of the post-pandemic economic recovery, filling up the Treasury. So legislators, interestingly enough, you remember it's a conservative legislature, and they chose not to cut taxes as other conservative states have done. There was a strong call for legislators to spend that money on one-time needs. And in the past, the legislators have taken money and not spent it properly. But this year, the good government groups are saying they did a good job of spending that one-time money, because they don't know that they'll have that money in the future, on one-time needs. And those one-time needs would be a new bridge for Baton Rouge, getting that started, a new bridge for Lake Charles, sewage and water systems throughout the state, extending I-49 south, paying down debt, filling the rainy day fund with more money, filling up the fund that pays unemployed workers. So that a lot of money was spent on all these different projects, and just about every legislator was happy with that.
So, and to be clear, this is not the money from the infrastructure bill.
Right, that money has not yet come down to Louisiana. Yeah, so this is money that Congress already appropriated. I remember the stimulus during the height of the pandemic, and also, again, the higher tax receipts than normal because of all the spending by people thanks to the economic recovery.
Okay, so let's talk about some other issues then, some that did pass and others that didn't, that were before the legislature, but for one reason or another were not passed.
Right. So interestingly enough, again, this conservative legislature did not pass legislation sought by the culture warriors on the right, did not pass anti-vaccine legislation. There was a gun measure that would allow people with a handgun a concealed handgun not to have to get a permit. That died as well. Also, the Don't Say Gay legislation aimed at teachers, that did not make it out, nor did the legislation that would go against the critical race theory. Now, on the other hand, the legislature did pass by a veto-proof margin legislation that is targeting transgender girls from competing in sports, and also the 2 anti-abortion measures passed as well. We're waiting for the governor to see whether he'll sign those, but probably he will. So again, a lot of conservative legislation did not make it through this year, but the conservatives did get some wins.
And the transgender legislation, the governor last year had vetoed it, and his veto stood. What happened this year? Right,
Marcia, there was a dramatic vote last year on that, and the governor's veto was not sustained. I mean, it was sustained, and then this year came back with basically the same legislation, and again, it was a veto-proof margin in both chambers. And the governor Monday night said he would let that bill become law without his signature. At the same time, he called it mean-spirited and unnecessary, but he indicated he did not want to be overridden on that legislation.
Okay, and of course another big issue is one that we're going to discuss a little bit later in the show, and that was congressional redistricting. So we'll come back to you on that, Tyler. Thanks a lot.
Right.
Okay, Mark, let's go on over to you right now, because you did a piece about there is a crevasse, a new channel that has opened in the river. I mean, just this is a natural thing, and it's way far south in Plaquemines, Lower Plaquemines. And there's debate about how to handle it.
Right. Well, it's the Corps has labeled it Neptune Channel because it is in that segment of the east bank of the Mississippi River where its levee segment is called the Neptune segment, and it stretches east into Breton Sound, into a portion of Breton Sound, and it allows a maximum of at least 117,000 cubic feet per second of water and sediment to enter Breton Sound, and it's already building some land apparently. To put that into perspective, the very controversial Mid-Barataria sediment diversion on the West Bank is only 75,000 cubic feet per second if it were to be built, and it would only be operating for half a year, and the rest of the time it wouldn't be flowing. There's another similar, much smaller diversion on the Breton side of the river as well. That also would only operate part of the year. But what's important about this, that the state says, is that it's a natural way of increasing wetlands in areas where wetlands are needed to protect hurricane levees further north. So they'd like to see as much of that flow to continue. The Corps is going to build a rock sill across the mouth to keep it from continuing to erode away and getting bigger. But it seems to be agreeable to allowing at least a portion of the flow to continue into the future.
Because the flow carries sediment, and then that sediment is deposited, and we get
Right.
land building.
Right. It's already seems to have significantly filled an area of open water in the midst of a wetland area just south of the channel path to the east. So it seems to be successful, and it's it's looking very much the way that other waterways at the end of the Atchafalaya River are also building land. So it's a potential positive. Scientists, though, say that it could also be it could be a sign that the Mississippi River's channel, the original channel, is reforming in a greater way, and that what's now called the Birdfoot Delta may be disappearing because of sea level rise. So that's something that scientists in the Corps are going to have to watch as time goes on.
And there's some navigational issues, though, too, right? With this natural diversion, as it were.
I'm sorry.
The navigational issues.
Yeah. So the reason the Corps wants to close it is indeed for that, because that amount of water flowing east slows down the water in the channel that's used by shipping, and it's caused sediment to build up in that channel and block shipping. They've already had to dredge once, which is a significant expense and would be a real problem. And it's an area where the Corps is attempting to actually deepen the channel to 50 feet.
Right, because the ships nowadays need this deeper channel. Yeah.
Exactly, for LNG facilities and all sorts of other trade that's coming from around the world.
So it's a lot of good, but there's also a bit of problems with this new channel that's been done. Okay, all right, Mark, thanks a lot. Let's go on over to Michael right now. And we've been hearing a lot in Orleans Parish about the issue with the smart city and council at odds with the administration about it. And there have been subpoenas for records and then contempt subpoenas, and it's going back and forth with courts already involved. All right, you explain it to us because I've lost track.
Absolutely. It's a busy story that kind of gives us updates every day right now. But, the very brief background here is that the Cantrell administration is facing some pretty serious allegations of contract fixing related to this very broad, multi-million-dollar smart cities project. Those allegations have prompted a formal city council investigation. They appear to also be investigated by the local Office of Inspector General, who has seized the electronics from several administration officials. Now, in the midst of all that, the contractors for this project have dropped out, but these investigations continue. And what we're seeing right now is the Cantrell administration putting up some pretty fierce resistance to the council investigation. The council has subpoenaed 5 administration officials in response to their investigation. And as of last week, at least 2 of those officials blew their deadline, did not hand over the documents that were requested. In response, Councilwoman Helena Moreno announced that she wanted to bring contempt of council charges against these officials. The day after she said that, the Cantrell administration brought the council to court. In civil district court, they asked a judge to basically squash a subpoena against one out of the 5 subpoenas against Cantrell's chief of staff, Clifton Davis. Now, in an initial ruling this week, a judge basically ruled against the administration, said the subpoena can go forward. And as a result, the city council ended up taking votes on Thursday, basically finding that these administration officials were in violation of the subpoena and urging local prosecutors to actually file charges and prosecute them for contempt of council. Now, the latest update here is basically at the same time that the council was taking votes on those contempt charges, the judge issued his written opinion, which basically put a stay on his ruling as the administration appeals to a higher court. So as of now, 1 out of these 5 subpoenas is temporarily on hold, but the other 4 are active. And 1 official appears to currently, regardless of this court order, be in violation of the subpoena and therefore at risk of facing these contempt charges.
And this is regarding coming before council as they conduct an investigation into this, right? And having these individuals come before council and answer their questions.
So this first step, the subpoenas were actually for specific documents. And as the council has pointed out, most of these are public records anyway. That's one of their objections to the Cantrell's administration's resistance. They argue that, anyone should be able to get a hold of these emails anyway. So for now, they're just asking for documents. It hasn't, we've had 1 hearing so far, but there have not been subpoenas for further hearings.
Do we know, what's the timeline on this? I mean, council is really active on this, seeming to really want to be thorough in this investigation. How long do they think they'll go?
Yeah, so the court case is really only relevant to 1 out of the 4 subpoenas here. From what I can see, it really won't, in the short term, slow down the council investigation much. They've vowed to continue with this regardless of the lawsuit. So, I think the timeline, we'll continue to see, this investigation through the summer. It's unclear when they'll close, whether the Inspector General will ever issue a report. Again, things are moving really fast with this. We learn new stuff every single week, so it's hard to predict.
Michael, let me ask you a political question. Cantrell's now in her 2nd term. She's term limited now. So all the council members knows that the next election you'll be electing a new mayor. This is usually when you see council members get more feisty now because they know the mayor's not going to be around. Do you think there's any of that going on?
Well, I think if you've watched this new council, which took office earlier this year, I mean, there's been a lot of tension between this current council and the administration. I mean, not just on the smart cities piece, but you've seen the 2 council members at large, Helena Moreno and J.P. Morrell, really go to bat with the administration, especially over the balance of powers between the 2 branches. Moreno and Morrell, of course, have not announced anything, but they're 2 people that certainly you could imagine would run for mayor at some point in the future. So, like always, I'm sure there's political considerations.
Always. I think that's without a doubt. There are political considerations.
Yeah.
All right, Michael, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
All right, Errol, let's go over to you. Back and stick with you right now. And you wanted to talk about what you see, what's happened nationwide in some DA elections,
Yeah, I think
former DAs, and how it applies here too.
I think this could have nationwide implications, especially in urban areas. Let me qualify one point. The DA in question is named Chesa Boudin in San Francisco, and his last name is spelled Boudin, which is the same way we spell Boudin. So anybody from Louisiana who may have been in San Francisco seeing signs saying "Remove Boudin" may have been wondering what's in the air, but it's a totally different issue that we're
Indeed
familiar
it is,
with.
yes.
Anyway, there's been an effort to recall him. It turns out it was a very successful effort. He was elected about a year or so ago, and he is what they call part of the progressive element, which would be the far left element. Decarceration, not incarceration, trying to be more sympathetic with people who commit crimes, and probably a lot of it is right, that they probably do need some support. But for voters, they don't want to be hearing that. They want to be hearing about people committing crimes, going to jail. And there's all kind of problems in San Francisco. A lot of street problems with homelessness and people just being able to walk in stores and do looting, public urination, and there's no real crackdown on all of this. And so people pretty much fed up with it. So there was a recall effort. He was very successful. He was defeated, but 60% of the vote voted to recall him. And so he's got 10 days to be out of office. Now, could this be a first sign? Because there's other DAs who were elected with those same sort of things. Jason Williams was sort of in that direction, maybe not as far, and I think he's righted his course a little bit. But there's another case in New York, in Manhattan, a DA named Alvin Bragg, and he's being seen as being the same sort of DA. Now, New York State doesn't have a recall law, but what New York State does, the law allows the governor to remove a person. Well, the governor in New York State is Kathy Hullock, who was an interim governor when Cuomo had to resign. We're seeing a lot of interim people here having to make decisions. She hasn't said anything about Bragg. However, there's also a New York State governor's election going on, and the next day, Rudy Giuliani's son, who's running for office, put out a statement saying if he's elected, the first thing he's going to do is get rid of Bragg. And a lot of the other candidates have said the same thing too. So this guy Bragg is probably be watching the governor's race pretty closely, because it's unusual to have a governor's race in which one of the main principles would be getting rid of him.
You know, recall elections are usually difficult to be successful in it. Those who are seeking to make this recall happen. You said 60% of the voters voted to recall
60,
this thing?
60, yeah.
So there was
Louisiana
definitely
has a recall law, and we saw it a few years ago with Mike Enney, and there was an effort, but it's more difficult in Louisiana. The formula, you have to have a higher percentage of signatures to get it on the ballot, and it just didn't happen. But California did it several years ago with Governor Gray Davis, who they recalled, and that was when Arnold Schwarzenegger became governor because of a recall election. And last year, you saw California try with Gavin Newsom, who is the governor, and in that case, it failed. But California is probably the most experienced with recall.
But bringing it back to Louisiana for a moment, Errol, isn't Jason Williams, the district here, sort of seen as in that same camp as, I call him Boudin, but Boudin?
Yeah. Well, he's been identified as one of the progressive DAs, but I got to tell you, when I saw the media coverage trying to identify him around the country, I didn't see Jason Williams. I think he's moderated a little bit, and so he's sort of in that camp, but not all the way.
All right, thanks a lot, E. Tyler, sticking with you. Let's now talk about that other issue that was before legislature this year, and this is congressional redistricting. Where do we stand?
Sure. So, Marcia, the background on this is that the legislature met in February in a special session to redraw the lines for the State House, the State Senate, the Public Service Commission, and also for Congress. You know, this is something that happens every 10 years to take advantage, to take into account the changing in the population. And the result was that, as it had been, the new map called for a single black majority district. It's, the one we have right now is Troy Carter representing New Orleans in a district that snakes up the Mississippi River to Baton Rouge, and that all the other 5 districts would have would be favored to elect a white and a Republican. And Governor John Bell vetoed that legislation to keep the status quo with one black majority district. But then the legislature, their next move was to override the governor, and that was a big deal because that was the first time a governor had been overridden in over 3 decades. But then the next move was the folks who wanted a second black majority district in the state, as John Bell Edwards had favored. They then went to court, and Judge Dick this past week out of Baton Rouge said, yeah, the state has 6 districts for Congress. About 1/3 of the state's residents are African Americans, so then 2 of the 6 districts should have a black majority. And so then the governor called the legislature into session next week to redraw the lines to create that second black majority district among the 6. And then last night, the appeals court here said, no, we're going to stay the order calling for the second black district by the judge, and so that's where we stand right now.
So that was the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. It was here in New Orleans, and the judge that you referred to is the district court, federal district court judge, right, in Baton Rouge.
Right, and I think the conservatives who drew the lines to keep the status quo, again, of 1 black majority district, 5 white majority districts, had expected the appeals court to step in their favor because it is known as a conservative district.
Okay, so where does that leave us now? In terms of will we or will we not? I mean, those who want to run for that seat have to qualify next month, right?
Yeah, qualifying is July 20th to July 22nd for all the congressional races across the state. And again, we don't know exactly what the lines will be. We know right now that the legislature drew 1 set of lines. The trial court judge said no, those lines are not accurate, but now the appeals court above the district court judge have said no, we're not going to let that order go into place. So then we're going to wait to see if there's a further ruling from the district court. And meanwhile, the legislature is supposed to go into special session next week, which that doesn't look like that will happen. Or if they do go into special session, that they'll actually do anything while we wait to see what, again, the appeals court rules.
Okay, well, those who support leaving the legislation, the redistricting, the congressional districts as we have it right now, argue that there's really not going to be enough time to make any sort of changes because of the fact that people need to qualify next month.
Right, and they cite what the Supreme Court did in Alabama, exactly making that same argument. Judge Dick in Baton Rouge said, no, actually, Louisiana's qualifying date is later than Alabama, so it would give enough time for the legislature to redraw the new district, the district boundaries to create that second black majority district and give candidates enough time to qualify.
Okay. Well, I guess we'll see what will happen on this one. Thanks a lot, Tyler. Mark, let's go on over to you. An issue that has come up in the Lakeshore area here in Orleans Parish is a proposal for a condo, and that is creating some consternation among some.
Right. This is a condo that actually was approved by the State Department of Natural Resources and the Army Corps of Engineers a couple of years ago, but it never moved forward on its permit, so the permit's expired. And it now has to go back and get approval again. And in the meantime, residents in the area where the condo is, it's outside the levee system. It's on the old Basin Canal, which also is the outflow from Pump Station 12, which serves Lakeview. And the opponents say that the way that the building would be built over a portion of the canal would block the flow of water out and would back up water into the pump station, which is in the process of being reviewed to see if it needs to actually be pushing more water out of Lakeview into Lake Pontchartrain. So they're real concerned about that. They've raised those objections. The other objection has been over the height of the building. It was originally supposed to be 15 stories high. The developers have changed that proposal to now be 6 stories high, about 45 feet, and which would meet the requirements of the city's zoning ordinances as opposed to the original plan. But they're not allowed to have that considered by the Department of Natural Resources as part of this permit because they filed it too late. So it's real unclear what's going to happen next on this. It still has to go through additional approvals by the city council, and at least one council member has come out against it.
Right, that's the council member of that district too, right?
Correct.
Is that correct, Councilman Giarrusso?
Right, Joe Giarrusso III.
Okay, so basically it's an idea right now, and it's shrunk down to a 6-story building, but there's opposition. So is it moving along? Is it going to move along? Does the developer still want to keep with this idea?
They're going to have to wait for what the Department of Natural Resources does with the permit, and DNR says that they plan on talking to the Sewerage and Water Board to get that issue of whether or not the pump station's outflow will be affected by this before they make a decision.
No, the developers say they've looked into this issue in terms of flooding, and they say no, it won't cause any flooding.
The developers say that there's no problem with it. It's not blocking the central channel of that canal, and it's the area where it is right now is filled with boats and boat houses. So they say that there's not much effect to it, but the opponents say it's not. That's not what the problem is. The problem is that it could affect the way that water gets out of Lakeview,
Right.
which would be a real problem.
Okay, Mark, thanks a lot. All right, guys, other stories. E, let's go over to you.
Yeah, the election to fill Karen Carter's state Senate seat will be in November 8th. Qualifying will be July 20th and 22nd. Right now, it looks like the main candidates will be 2, perhaps 3 state representatives. So there's a good chance by the time this election is done, there'll be a vacancy for a state representative seat.
Okay, let's go over to you, Michael.
Yeah, something I'm watching is going to be some deadlines on Katrina aid funds. We had reported on this $2 billion pot of money that FEMA had awarded after Hurricane Katrina for road work and to replace sewage and water board pipes. The city has spent well less than half of that, and recently admitted that they're not going to spend the money in time and are now relying on FEMA to grant an extension, or we're going to lose out on hundreds of millions of dollars perhaps in this funding, which is sorely needed. So what FEMA is going to do next is a big one.
All right, Tyler.
Yeah, just to follow up on what Errol said, for that state Senate seat to replace Karen Carter Peterson, Royce Duplessis, who's a Democrat from New Orleans, announced yesterday he is going to run, and we already have Mandy Landry, who is already running. It's probably the most liberal district, state Senate district in the state. And so it's going to be an interesting race.
It will be. Mark, real quick.
So if it rains, you can expect in New Orleans that there will be an investigation of drainage following fairly quickly. And we had a heavy rain on Friday morning with several inches and lots of street flooding that occurred. And Councilman Eugene Green has asked for an investigation into why this continues to happen in his district.
Okay. Thanks a lot, guys, for being here. Thank you all, too, for joining us. We'll see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.